shorter one to see if it was the cord. But
yeah, it's definitely that box. So
well,
not a
thank
fan
you.
of that thing.
Yes.
Let me take this down so it doesn't get kicked away.
I'm toying with moving it to the table.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not super steady right here. So I might move it here and then it will be a move point.
All
but
right.
if I do leave it here, I might have to take it.
No problem. He's jumping on the mic real quick.
Thank you.
That should be a much cleaner input.
Check 1, 2.
Get close to the mic. Get close to the mic.
Check 1, 2, 1, 2, 3,
Nice.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Matter of fact. You can switch it. Yeah.
Only if you have an issue with your direct feed speed. That's our backup.
Gotcha.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. No problem.
Oh, you know what? Get rid of that red box. That's the problem. Slide it to the middle. Yeah, okay, stop. Ah. It's gonna happen one way or another. I'm just gonna have it be double. I hate this thing. There we go. Nobody touched it.
I didn't get a lid for her tea. She actually found it.
Yeah. Although she's kind of mad because I didn't use her to do the research. Being in opposite positions. It's so weird because I'm on a Mac, but I'm in Intercity. So I keep trying to do like Intercity, and that doesn't do anything
You
for
expect
me.
it to have a seamless interface and
Right? It's weird.
have this piece of crap operating system. I don't know how that like. Is that your work?
My personal laptop is like the one
But I will do it also off of Brianna's here, but yeah, basically whatever you need to, because I don't need you picking up that when you pick that.
Exactly. Now, the way this works, if
So
he's
you got a
leaning,
power, that's the power.
if he's leaning back and talking to this, when we mute the system, whoever hits that button next will activate it. Will work. We can do it full shutdown, and then whoever decides to speak again. Correct. Sure. You know what seat number is over there? Looks like a 7. It'll pop up. That's true. Okay.
Hi, Eddie. Can you say you're the press secretary?
Yes.
Gotcha. I'm Nick.
Sure.
I have a press. I'm over there, but I have a first person here. I'll even text her.
Sure.
She can even let you know. So we will make sure you are aware of something. But if you see it, go for it.
Yes, you got it. Cool. No problem.
And I will try to relate all of the rates so that your sister is on.
Correct.
I will work on that.
Thank you so much.
Not a problem. Thank you guys.
No problem.
Yeah.
Morning,
Up
lady.
in the top? All right. We're not today, so I'm from here.
And Christian.
I need to make sure that they're aware of how to turn on some of these. I don't do that right now. I don't want to talk to them for
Nope, yeah,
It's
something.
pretty easy, but it's an on-off function, so. Okay. How are you?
It's lunch.
Yeah, that definitely moves in as possible. So last night I was like, "Can I get a table?" And he said,
Yeah, but I was still there.
"This goes off. This is Commerce Press 2017. The capital C, capital K."
Okay. All one word.
Yeah.
Did you know how much salt is poured now instead of
Hi, I'm Brianna. Oh, hey.
Yeah.
I'm trying to Yeah, so we have an opportunity to
Yeah.
someone that
I can see why this is.
Here we go.
So it's gonna be over right next to the
Yeah, you should look. Just go Google Maps. Going past it.
let me know if you need anything. Yeah, it's good to meet you guys. Nice to meet you. I don't know. I don't know. I'll come there and wait for people.
I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah.
The articles coming. So all the testimony is set up on the table up there. And then so you'll see on the table on the ground.
I'm introducing your boss.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
That's good.
No. David's been sick all week.
Okay.
Yeah, he got the COVID fresh. Hi, Austin. Anna Schneider. Nice to meet you. I'll be introducing you. Yeah. Yeah, you're still my favorite person. So I'll be kind of sort of angry at you. You are having fun. Yeah, reading about you. Holy cow. America is so impressive. Stanford dropout. Rudy's I have a 17-year-old who's trying to get banned from Stanford. I'm like, you should go here just so you can see each other.
It's not so much where you leave college, it's just where you
We
drop
dropped
out.
out, yeah.
But
No,
there's still
that-
3 months. Yeah. You get alumni status after 3 months. So.
There you go. So this is Michael Louder. He works with us. Austin Russell, CEO of Luminar. Tony was now we got it right.
My stuff looks really good.
Yeah. So what was it? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'll be on for him. Never been a bitter. He's not a bitter guy anymore.
Yeah, it's put down on this side.
That's his.
Can we just adjust it this way?
Well,
Or we can just adjust it up there.
Alan's now happy. Danny and Dan
Oh, okay.
are going to get married. No dates set. I got engagement. Very good. Daphne.
I'm sure. So, Shira?
She is not here. I expect her.
Yeah. Good. Well, it doesn't look like there's a line to get in.
Get
So
out of your way.
all right. Well, I'll see you tonight.
Yeah, I need to see this afternoon.
Okay. Nice to meet you.
I think your panel is supposed to be 45.
See you.
I never had like what? A week.
I will. Good to see you.
All right. See you later.
So is there a big elevation?
I don't think so.
So do you remember Dean Williams from out in
Absolutely.
from this
Great seeing you again. Yeah, I know. A little bit delayed. Exactly.
I know, right. Good.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming by.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. Yeah. We were worried we weren't going to shut down for about 4 hours.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, this time it affected me. It was my first time.
So,
But yeah, on Monday.
but they passed an emergency bill and make sure that 4 hours that you were working.
It's my understanding there's a bunch of
houses got like their heads wherever.
Yeah, no.
What's up, man? How are you? Listen, I'm just gonna have a meet up with somebody else here. So I'm sorry.
No, you're important. You're important. I'm gonna start catching.
Okay. Great seeing you guys. Yeah, go ahead.
This is Alton Russell. This is a CEO from
I can't imagine that.
So I've shot with one of those before, and they have like a tripod.
recent years, we've held field hearings in Alaska, New Hampshire, Nebraska, Florida, and yes, South Dakota. While we haven't traveled quite as far today, what we are here to discuss is no less important for all Americans, and it's great to be in a venue that will soon welcome scores of people excited about the future of the automobile. The automobile industry is an essential part of America's economy, generating nearly $1 trillion of economic activity each year and supporting 7 million jobs across all 50 states. And this industry is not standing still. It's hard to believe, but the auto industry spends more on research and development of new technologies than the software and aerospace in 30,000 parts drawn from the global supply chain. New technologies such as automated vehicles and new business models offering mobility as a service are poised to enable substantial growth. Key benefits include improved safety, new jobs, new transportation opportunities, and reduced congestion. Automated vehicles, or AVs, offer perhaps the largest potential gains in all of these areas. More than 37,000 people lost their lives on U.S. roads in 2016, a troubling and unacceptable increase from the year before. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA, as many as 94% of those crashes were the result of human error. AVs, which cannot fall asleep, get distracted, or become impaired, could potentially save many thousands of lives every year. AVs may also spur significant new economic activity. By one estimate, the wide adoption of AVs will spur a new passenger economy worth $7 trillion over the next few decades. And AVs will provide access to mobility to many Americans, such as the elderly and those with disabilities, some of whom may be unable to drive today. If our country is to realize these benefits, policymakers must take a careful approach to these new technologies. We must allow innovation to thrive while also ensuring the technology is safe and reliable. We must also refrain from favoring one technology, business model, or type of company over another, so as to avoid locking in technology before innovation and market choices can take place. The bipartisan AV START Act, which Senator Peters and I introduced, accomplishes these goals by building on the existing regulatory framework to prioritize safety through increased reporting and oversight, thus promoting public safety and building public confidence and trust. At the same time, the AV START removes unintentional barriers to innovation in existing law and promotes a level playing field so that neither traditional automakers, tech giants, nor new startups are unfairly advantaged or disadvantaged. If U.S. regulators are not able to foster safe testing and deployment of AV technology through modernizations like those in AV Start, the rest of the world will not sit by. America currently leads the way in auto innovation, but many other countries, particularly China, are catching up. We all want America to remain competitive and see the benefits of new jobs and new economic growth. The AV Start Act is just that, a start. As AVs become more widespread, there will be tough policies that interact with AVs. This committee will remain active and will build upon the strong foundation established by the AV Start Act. I want to thank Senator Peters, Ranking Member Nelson, and all the members of the committee for the great work on this landmark piece of legislation and look forward to seeing it pass the full Senate soon. While AV technology is approaching quickly, the auto industry is innovating in other areas with immediate benefits. Advanced driver assistance systems such as lane keeping assist and automatic emergency braking are available in an increasing number of vehicles on the road today and are already saving lives. And new development of fuel technologies such as hybrid and all-electric vehicles and increased use of biofuels such as ethanol boost fuel efficiency and reduce pollution. To explore these issues, we have a great panel of witnesses today representing organizations that are leading the way in many areas of automotive innovation. Mr. Luke Schneider, who's president of Audi Mobility US, Mr. Mike Mansueti, president of Robert Bosch North America, Mr. Tim Kentley-Kay, CEO and co-founder of Zoox, Inc., and Dr. Randy Abbott, who's president of Florida Polytechnic University. I want to thank all of you for being with us today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. And I will turn now to Senator Nelson for his opening remarks. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There you go. Mr. Chairman, I was almost one of those traffic statistics this morning. Coming down one of the north-south streets, going the speed limit. Suddenly a car in the right lane to my front suddenly does a U-turn in the entire street right in front of us, to which we commented if we were an automated vehicle and he was an automated vehicle, that wouldn't happen. So there was a demonstration for me early this morning. I, like the chairman, am very hopeful about the prospect of self-driving cars. I appreciate the efforts of Senator Peters, who has made this a signature issue. It's appropriate for him because of being from Michigan, and he has been dogged in his pursuit of this legislation. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, that you have arranged to be down here at the auto show. It seems to have gotten a good bit of interest. I wonder how many here for the hearing and how many are here really to go to the auto show. But your planning was enormously successful. And I'm very excited about my state of Florida's role in the development of autonomous technology. I'm pleased that a part of our panel is Dr. Advent, who is the president of Polytechnic University in Florida, and it is working in partnership with the Florida Department of Transportation to develop and operate a $42 million, 475-acre autonomous vehicle testing facility at their campus. And I want to congratulate you for this achievement, Dr. Advent. And I'm confident that your world-class facility will, in fact, play a vital role in the ongoing research that we're going to do. This technology is advancing rapidly. Just 2 weeks ago, at the electronics show in Las Vegas, General Motors announced a plan to put fully autonomous vehicles, without driver controls on the public roads as early as 2019. Now, whether or not that occurs depends on us and our legislation. And General Motors is not alone. Countless other automakers, technology companies, and suppliers are rolling out innovations that have the potential to completely transform our sense of mobility and, as the chairman mentioned, to cut down, and as I experienced, on a lot of traffic accidents. In addition, these vehicles may bring significant environmental benefits through reduced emissions, increased efficiency, productivity, improved transportation opportunities for underserved communities and seniors and people with disabilities. While these benefits of self-driving vehicles are numerous, it's crucial that the Congress and the federal government exercise responsible oversight to ensure the safe development and deployment of these technologies. So the AV START Act, which was passed unanimously by this committee in October, it's an important step. The bill enhances safety by requiring autonomous vehicle manufacturers to submit safety evaluation reports to the Department of Transportation. And that is to demonstrate how they will address system safety, crash worthiness, and cybersecurity, among others. And additionally, this act reinforces the traditional existing roles played by federal, state, and local governments pertaining to vehicle registration. With you and Senator Peters as this legislation advances.
There we go. Thank you, Senator Nelson. And we look forward, again, we want to welcome our panel. Thank you for being here. We'll start on my left and your right with Dr. Randy Avent, who's president of Florida Polytechnic University in Lakeland, Florida. Mr. Tim Camley-Clay, who's CEO and co-founder of Zoox, Inc. From Menlo Park, California. And Mr. Mike Mansuetti, and I said that wrong the first time, my apologies, Mike, with Robert Bosch, North America, Robert Bosch, LLC in Northville, Michigan, and Mr. Luke Schneider, who's president of Audi Mobility, located in the U.S. here in Austin, Texas. So thank you all for being here. We look forward to hearing from you. If you can find your oral remarks to as closely as possible to 5 minutes, we'll make sure that all of your testimony gets included in the written record. We'll maximize the opportunity that we have for members to ask questions. So, Dr. Avent, please proceed. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, Senator Nelson, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to address you today on this very important topic. As many of you know, the vision of driverless cars has been around well over 50 years, but very little progress was made in that area until 2004, when DARPA created a prize competition called the DARPA Grand Challenge. Since then, there's been an exponential growth in the underlying AV technology that mirrors the development trajectories in other disruptive markets like computing, networking, and DNA sequencing. Today, I'd like to briefly touch on 3 dimensions of connected and autonomous vehicles: the market impact, the technical and regulatory challenges, and the potential role of the federal government. As you all pointed out, numerous papers abound outlining the promises of autonomous vehicles. If developed and implemented correctly, the primary advantage of autonomous vehicles centers on significantly lower driver-related deaths. As you pointed out, Senator, last year alone, there were nearly 40,000 fatalities in the U.S. at a cost of over $410 billion, and more than 90% of those were due to human error. But there are many secondary advantages that are also significantly important. For instance, autonomous vehicles can improve access for the elderly, children, and poor, and can make public transportation more effective by solving the last mile problem. It can significantly increase the utilization of automobiles, which is less than 5% now, and with higher utilization of fewer cars, the capacity of our transportation infrastructure will naturally rise. Beyond the transportation sector impact, core technologies underlying autonomy will impact other markets, such as agriculture, logistics, national defense, and manufacturing. In fact, it would be hard to find any technology with a more disruptive impact on both the U.S. and global economy than connected and autonomous vehicles. I often say piston-powered vehicles driven by people and built by traditional car manufacturers may soon be replaced by interconnected computers on wheels, scheduled and controlled by autonomous algorithms and developed by IT companies. U.S. car manufacturers will need to look more like IT companies as they already are. Insurance markets, law enforcement, hotels, real estate, lawyers, auto repair, and healthcare will all be affected, just to name a few. But while the promise of AV technology is noteworthy, there are still substantial barriers to its widespread adoption. For one, the AV technology core relies on what I call the sensor and signal processing chain, and there's still significant work that needs to be done on the edge cases to improve performance. A strong regulatory framework is paramount to safety and consumer acceptance, but an over-regulated market is likely to stifle innovation and give our global competitors an advantage. To this end, we need a science-based, data-driven approach to create policies and legislation that's modeled after successful verification or certification approaches in other industries. This framework must integrate the full spectrum of testing approaches, ranging from digital simulation and hardware-in-the-loop emulation to closed circuit and public open road testing in urban areas. Lastly, there will be a rapid shift in transportation technologies towards computer science, electrical engineering, and analytics as the sensor and signal processing chain matures and vehicles interact with the civil infrastructure. Both the transportation industry and their regulatory partners will need to prepare for this shift. States such as Florida have taken a leadership role in enabling this market. The federal government can have a very constructive role in enabling this transformative technology through research funding, through consortiums that investigate and provide factual data around AV accidents, much like the NTSB role in aviation accidents, and through creating quasi-government organizations much like the Department of Energy and Department of Defense's federally funded research and development centers and university-affiliated research centers that conduct applied research and provide independent, unbiased technology expertise to the government. Finally, Florida Poly is working with its partners to research solutions to these challenges. This includes a deep partnership with the Florida Turnpike Enterprise's world-class AV test track called SunTrax, and a partnership with the Orlando Smart City Initiative that provides open road testing in an urban setting. These two test complexes, combined with Florida Poly's Advanced Mobility Institute, is focused on addressing many of these vexing challenges. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Abbott. Mr. Kenley-Floyd.
Chairman Thrun, Ranking Member Nelson, Senators, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. When I arrived in the US from Australia just over 3 years ago, Zoox was but a dream. So it is indeed an honor to be here before you and among respected business leaders. Today I will share with you our vision and the journey of Zoox, our perspective on the step change safety opportunity offered by autonomous mobility, and finally, the opportunity we have as a country to set the best policy foundation on which to build this technology and get it on the road. My journey with autonomous mobility began in 2012, while in Melbourne, Australia, watching from afar what Google was doing, attempting to develop a self-driving car. My insight at the time was that such technology is about much more than incremental adaptation to the automobile. This technology, correctly understood, is going to transform how we move everyone and everything on this planet. The belief we hold at Zoox is that AI and mobility will take us from the age of the automobile into the next mobility age. And we think that's the age of robotics, fully automated transportation. Thus, Zoox was founded to ask the question, what is the full realization of autonomy and mobility? Can we imagine that? And if we can, let's not build it in 10 years. Let's build it now. At Zoox, we've gone from this founding vision to today augmenting cars that work as autonomous vehicles driving in downtown San Francisco. We are driving during the day, we are driving during the night, in heavy rain and fog. We're also driving autonomously on freeways. In short, Zoox is driving autonomously a complete set of urban, road and weather features as we speak. Beyond this, because we believe the four-wheelization technology is not retrofitting cars, we are also creating a vehicle from the ground up, without traditional controls, that's purpose-built for the needs of our cities today and tomorrow. This means shared, on-demand, zero-emission, safe, and wonderful mobility. This represents a phenomenal effort by a highly interdisciplinary team that's fast growing over 375 at Zoox. Expertise ranges across fields of artificial intelligence with over 70 PhDs, product design, safety, vehicle engineering. The teams come from organizations such as Google, Tesla, Apple, Ferrari, NVIDIA, NASA, and NHTSA, and along with academic institutions such as Stanford, MIT, Oxford, Princeton, and Carnegie Mellon University. The very real safety opportunity that autonomous mobility will offer drives our work every day at Zoox. Autonomous technology holds out the promise for a whole new safety paradigm, one that allows us to prevent crashes in the first place. The number of people we lost as a result of car crashes in 2016 went up, despite our best efforts. That number represents nearly 2,000 more loved ones lost. In fact, car crashes are the leading cause of death of young people in this nation. This should be unacceptable to us. Mobility offers the opportunity to make irrelevant the safety risks associated with driver impairment and error. We should act on that. Finally, these paradigm shifts in both mobility and safety innovation. What then is the policy opportunity? First, it is important to recognize that we are in the midst of a great and global race. Other countries are sprinting to harness and deploy this technology. And I know I certainly could have not have started Zoox and scaled it as fast as I could with my co-founder and wonderful team anywhere else than the United States of America. It welcomed me with open arms. I am grateful for that and keen to maintain our competitive edge here. The signals we send to entrepreneurs and innovators through our regulatory system are vitally important to meet that end. Today, the posture of both the administration and Congress has been to create a level playing field to let the innovators innovate. This must continue. Your AV Start Act, as well as the Self-Drive Act, capture these principles and encourage innovation in a technology-neutral way, without picking winners. The legislation making its way through Congress, in our view, is the right approach for this moment. Finally, the Zoox journey is all about connecting people and places, safely, in an environmentally conscious way, and with a sense of wonder. Autonomous mobility sits on the vanguard of possible. As the innovators, we look forward to working with you, the regulators, to create with verve the next era in mobility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cantley-Clay. Mr. Mansway.
Chairman Thune, Ranking Member Nelson, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. Robert Bosch founded the company in 1886 in Germany, and we established Bosch companies in the U.S. today have now grown to encompass more than 18,000 associates in 25 states. Of our 4 business sectors, Mobility Solutions is the largest. The U.S. remains at the forefront of Bosch's innovation efforts. We are actively testing automated vehicles in Michigan and in California, and in 2017, Bosch announced the creation of a new center of competence for artificial intelligence, and Silicon Valley will serve as one of the 3 global sites for these efforts. I appreciate the opportunity to share Bosch's view on the transformation of the auto industry. This hearing is taking place at a critical juncture in our history. We are witnessing a revolution in almost every aspect of the vehicle, from how we power our cars to how we handle and transition control of the overall vehicle, to the future role of the vehicle in the lives of individuals. I deeply appreciate the efforts of Chairman Thune, Senator Peters, Ranking Member Nelson, and all of the committee members in sponsoring and passing the AV Start Act. The committee staff took great care to consider the issues that are impacting auto suppliers and to understand the complex role that we play as incubators and developers of automated driving systems. Bosch further commends the committee for including crash avoidance technologies in the consumer education requirement from the AV START Act. We also express our appreciation to Senators Heller and Markey for their ongoing support of crash avoidance technologies. At Bosch, we have a vision for accident-free driving. We see the potential for automated vehicles and advanced driver assistance systems to dramatically decrease vehicle-related injuries and fatalities. Making automated driving a reality calls for profound understanding of all vehicle systems. Bosch has this expertise, and we manufacture the key components, including radar, video, and ultrasonic sensors, brake control systems, and electric power steering. Automated driving will demand much more than just a fitment of our new vision for the electronic architecture and the safety-critical functions of the vehicle. To realize higher levels of automated driving, we need redundancy in safety-critical systems, such as braking and steering. Bosch is actively developing redundant braking solutions to support all levels of automation, and this redundancy is a critical element, especially for level 4 and level 5 automated vehicles. It is also important for level 3 vehicles where a human driver is still necessary, but safety-critical functions may be handled by the vehicle. As part of navigating this new landscape, Bosch is forging alliances. For example, in 2017, we announced a partnership with Daimler, which will focus on level 4 and level 5 automated vehicles. Bosch is also cognizant of the tremendous need for consumer outreach. To bolster public understanding, Bosch has launched the Bosch Automated Mobility Academy to educate the public on how automated mobility can improve their quality of life and explain how various advanced technologies will make the fully automated future possible. The topic of cybersecurity is tightly intertwined with the increasingly automated and connected vehicles, and it is a priority for Bosch. Bosch has worked for several years to develop robust and comprehensive solutions for our customers. We strongly support the layered approach to vehicle cybersecurity and have espoused this principle in the development of our own products and engagement with our customers. We evaluate our customers' requirements in two ways. First, by developing systems and technologies that can address risks based on the electronic architecture of the vehicles, and second, by investing in future solutions that will be interwoven into vehicle design from the onset. Understanding the importance of industry cooperation and addressing potential threats and developing best practices, Bosch joined the Auto ISAC in 2016. As we look forward to these advances, we cannot fail to address the demand for trained workers to fulfill the millions of jobs that will be needed to fuel the transformation. We clearly recognize the need to build and shape the manufacturing workforce of the future. To support this, Bosch maintains an apprenticeship program at several of our U.S. manufacturing facilities, and in addition, our U.S. foundation, the Bosch Community Fund, provides grants to STEM-based educational programs and professional development for teachers. So thank you again for the opportunity today. Bosch looks forward to continuing to work with each of you and the committee as we continue to develop technologies that are truly invented for life. Thank you, and I look forward.
Thank you, Mr. Mansley. Mr. Schneider.
Chairman Thune, Ranking Member Nelson, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today, and thank you on behalf of the automotive industry and developers of automated vehicles for your leadership in working to enact the AV START Act. There's an urgency for the Senate to pass the AV START Act because it will create for innovators a consistent national regulatory framework for automated vehicles that's necessary to advance mobility solutions, to positively transform American cities, provide mobility to the elderly and disabled, and ensure greater safety on our roads, a priority we share with Commerce, with your committee, and the Department of Transportation. Passage of this legislation will allow us to realize the three transportation revolutions we so often talk about: shared mobility, electrification, and automated vehicles, enhanced by digitalization, which some consider a fourth. Automation and digitalization are disruptive innovations, especially for automakers, and we're driving this new future as an industry. The clear societal opportunities and what the related technologies can offer is what is motivating us to rethink mobility in the most comprehensive way since the 1890s. As the CEO of Silvercar, a disruptor in its own right, I'd like to share some insights into where this new frontier of automated, electric, and shared mobility as a service is headed. And while some skeptics fear job dislocation from disruptive innovations, the fact is, disruptive disruptors have created new categories of jobs that didn't exist before. Existing sectors will continue to expand and transform, and a range of new jobs will be created for workers across all skill levels. Audi is in the innovation business. Audi perfected all-wheel driving on racetracks and then offered that technology across our fleet. We were the first to take Google Earth Mobile in our navigation system before it was on phones. We implemented LED lighting before it became an industry standard. And as we enter what many call the third wave of the technological revolution, the auto industry finds itself in the center of it all. There will be more industry innovation in the next decade than in the last century. The cost of batteries has gone down significantly, while the number of sensors in the average vehicle has increased dramatically, thanks to innovations in everything from capacity to size. The way we want to access transportation through the use and even ownership of vehicles is fundamentally changing, along with the other major consumer categories in our lives. Innovation will continue to be our legacy and our responsibility, but we won't be innovating just to sell more cars. We'll be innovating to reduce fatalities, ease congestion, lessen emissions, and improve mobility for all. The most important benefit of all this innovation is safety. The innovations I mentioned earlier all have one thing in common: safety. All-wheel drive excels in the worst conditions. Navigation systems tell people exactly where to go, so they spend less time on the road, even as they keep their eyes on it. Our lighting illuminates that road with the closest thing to daylight. But here's the staggering reality. 1.25 million people die on our roads every year globally. And human error is the #1 cause. Vehicle automation promises to improve safety on our roads and reduce collisions by as much as 90%. But, maybe even more exciting, it can also deliver basic access that tens of millions of people currently don't have. The elderly and those with disabilities will be able to move with far greater freedom and efficiency. In America, nearly 16 million people 65 and older live in communities where public transportation is poor or non-existent. 6 million people with a disability have difficulty accessing transportation. For Audi, that's why we're delivering Level 3 automation, as well as working to develop highly automated vehicles that need no human driver at the wheel. Automated vehicles have potential to reduce fuel use and carbon emissions, since they're likely to be EVs, share, and drive more efficiently than humans. And fewer crashes means fewer traffic jams. We want to work together to address the challenges facing cities and communities, like reducing fatalities, reducing congestion and pollution, maximizing scarce infrastructure dollars, and optimizing transportation flows. The new mobility options we are pursuing and the legislation you are working on will help us address this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. We're going to have 5-minute rounds of questions here and try and keep this moving as much as we can. But again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. I find this technology incredibly exciting, and I just look at the transformational impact it could have on our economy in terms of safety first and foremost, but secondly, productivity, providing mobility for, as has been pointed out, communities of people that previously have not had access to it. I mean, it just seems, and some of us up here have had the benefit too of being able to ride in some of these vehicles and see what's happening out there. But I have a question for you that and I'm going to make this a 2 or 3-pronged question so I can try and cover a lot of ground here. But there are skeptics out there, and I know that a lot of it has to do with Americans like to drive, and it's a difficult transition to integrate AVs into a national confidence in this technology. 2, how do you address the concern that people have about negative impacts on the labor market? People who drive vehicles, for example, as a profession. And 3, one of the other concerns that I've heard is how do you address the issue of cybersecurity, which I get, that question comes up with regard to this technology as well. So if you could speak to how we convince people this is a good thing, and come back, and those are at least 3 questions that I hear posed at me, and questions I'd love to have you get an opportunity to answer. So feel free, whoever would like to take a stab at that.
I mean, perhaps I'll start. Thank you for those questions. We're also very concerned with those issues and have been working a lot to address those. To your first question regarding building consumer trust, that was one of the big things that we see that we need to do, and is a job of the automotive industry, and that's why we started the Bosch Academy, the Bosch Mobility Academy. So when we talk to people, and we talk to consumers about automated vehicles and are they ready to let go, many of them are not. They're ready to let go of certain functions, for example, parking. And we see parking as an early use case to help speed the adoption of automated vehicles, because who would not like to just get out, push a button, and return? And that helps build the trust. So we'd be happy to talk more, and we have this academy to helping to educate consumers on that. Regarding the labor impacts, I think we all stated that there will be quite a number of new jobs, new opportunities created. So on the manufacturing side, we continue to invest in apprentice programs and re-educating our workforce. And I think business models that are merged, we're going to see tremendous opportunities as vehicles become more highly utilized, that the increased opportunities for maintenance and cleaning and different things of this nature will arise for these business models. And cybersecurity is very important to us. So this all hinges on good, robust cybersecurity measures. We see cybersecurity kind of as a layered approach. Think about it from an onion, starting at the basic silicon levels and building in technology and cybersecurity and the hardware and the connections, and then looking at the entire network from an intrusion detection system. So those are some of the things that we are working on.
Well, I wanted to respond to that question with a few examples and a few instances in my personal experience. The first is, one of the great things about the AV START Act is that it contemplates consumer education in the bill itself, that the Department of Transportation, alongside individual OEMs and other industry players and industry associations, all really conspire to do this together, so that the consumer public can become more comfortable with the concept of a car driving itself. With respect to jobs, I can speak from personal experience there. We started a company, Silver Car, 5 years ago, created about 200 jobs in a very short period of time, all of which spanned a number of job categories. I think the big difference here is that the people employed in personal transportation are going to be working at some different things, not exactly the same things that they're working on today. That's fundamental to the nature of technology changing the way we move around. But we're optimistic about it because of the job classes and categorizations and the heavy technology orientation that they've had in companies like Silver Car. And the last piece of this is really about security. This is always going to be a concern, and frankly, I think from a safety and a security perspective, very few industries are as regulated as the automotive industry. What we look at is the ability to separate systems within cars so that we don't impact driving systems or core systems, and we're still able to make use of the data that's generated by the use of these shared mobility systems to provide better and more efficient transportation.
Senator Throon, thank you for your 3 questions. To address them briefly, in terms of adoption, there's always a bell curve with a new technology. You have your early adopters, you have the mainstream in the middle, and then you have your laggards at the end that may never adopt the technology. In the case of aviation, even though it's one of the safest modes of transportation, some people still refuse to fly. Ironically, they would drive even though it's much more dangerous. So I think the way to do this is you have to build trust with the community. This is happening today as the developers develop this technology. There has been no injury by any developer of autonomous technology working in America, yet from a vehicle that's driving itself. And yet there's been many cases where the vehicles have been hit by human drivers. And so I think by limiting the geographic domain of deployment of the vehicles in the first instance to, say, downtown areas in lower speeds in good weather, we can win the public's trust and expand the technology over time. In terms terms of the jobs piece, people often talk about disruptive technology. I find that term a little bit myopic. I see it's actually creating a constructive technology, correctly understood. For a new way to come into vogue in the mainstream, I think it has to be materially better than the incumbent. And so I think what we're actually creating is a new way of doing things better, and that will lead to new job creation. And this is always the way with technology. If you look in America 100 years ago today, 40% of the workforce worked in agriculture. Today it's less than 1%, but we don't have 40% unemployment as a consequence, because there's a whole new set of economies and jobs that we have. And just as there's more people and more revenue from the automobile industry and the horse and carriage industry, there's going to be more people working and more revenue in the autonomous mobility era as well. So we see great opportunity here, and the challenge for society is really how do we reskill people to get the new job opportunities that will come from new technology. And finally, in security, that requires perpetual vigilance. Cybersecurity is always going to be a threat. It's probably not the best to disclose in intimate ways what our countermeasures are at Zoox, but it's something we think a lot about, and something we're happy to chat about offline. But one thing I would say is it's important to understand the geometry of how these vehicles will work. In Zoox's case, we own and operate the vehicle. So a customer can't buy it, and they can't reverse engineer it in their garage to understand how to hack it or how it can work. To access the vehicle, you need to have a credit card and be part of the system, so we know who you are. And then when tracking the vehicle, we know where you are and what you're doing. And then that vehicle is limited to the road network. The occupant in the vehicle has no capacity to take off that road network as a bad actor. And so if you add all that up, I think it means that the technology is actually quite secured, and it's really not a good area for a bad actor to try and do something that would be negative for society.
Dr. Advent and Mr. Kenley Clay, if you would paint the picture as a result of autonomous vehicles, what the downtown streets of New York City, Manhattan, look like in the future?
Just to follow on the conversation previously, I think that there's no magic bullet for consumer trust. It's going to have to be built incrementally, and probably is going to lag behind the technology. So I think this technology is going to be adopted maybe a little bit slower than what there are many predictions of that. But when it's adopted, I think that you'll see, like I said, interconnected computers that are scheduling each other. They're optimizing, they're adaptive. So downtown New York City will have vehicles on it. There'll probably be fewer vehicles with more capacity because utilization of vehicles now is about 5%, and parking will change significantly. I think that you'll see vehicles communicate to each other and interact with the environment, so much safer and much more efficient transportation.
So will there be as much the need to purchase your own vehicle in the future, Mr. Kelly?
Senator Nelson, thank you for your question. While people love driving cars, people don't like driving a car in gridlock. Right? It's not a good use of our time. It's already clear in cities, and Manhattan's a great example. The average car ownership is 0.6 per household. Nationally in America, it's a little bit under 2. And the demographics are quite clear that young people see car ownership as a hassle. They have to park it, they have to do insurance, they have to do maintenance. They would much rather just have an on-demand model where they can pay for what they use, and when they're not using it, someone else is, which is a wonderful use of that product, right? It's getting high utilization. To address your question before in terms of how does this change Manhattan, I mean, Manhattan is the crown jewel for this technology in many ways. There's actually 13,000 Ubers and Lyfts and taxis operating on the island at any one time. In the opening stanzas of the technology, I think we're developing our technology to work in a mixed mode environment. But beyond the launch of the technology, I think in the space of sort of 5 to 10 years, I think you'll see cities creating disincentives for cars that pollute and that are human driven to come into the most congested areas and just to have autonomous mobility. And that will be transformation for those cities. You'll reduce congestion, you'll enhance the air quality within the city, you'll be able to clean up the urban landscape. You know, there's a lot of visual pollution from traffic lights, signposts, car parking. You open up more lanes. And so I think from an urban planning point of view, the technology actually holds great promise to actually refresh and reinvent our most dense urban areas to be safer and more enjoyable.
Paint the picture of the future of travel from New York to Chicago, from Washington to Philadelphia. What is it going to look like? Any one of you. And then I want to ask you, Mr. Snyder, I want to find out, since you're one of the auto companies, I want you to tell me, why is this not threatening the purchase of your, the picture of this long distance travel?
Well, I think it's going to be wonderful. You know, imagine the difference between a horse and carriage and the Model T Ford. That's an incredible transformation. And it's our belief we're about to go through the same transformation in terms of the products that the general public will be able to access to enhance their ability to move across the country.
So is it, we're going to have high-speed, dedicated lanes that you're going to punch in that I want to go to Philadelphia, or I want to go to Baltimore, or New York, or Boston? Is that what the future of long-distance travel is? Anybody?
I think you'll see mixed mode transportation. People still fly, take trains, and they'll drive cars. I think the technology will start in our more dense urban areas first, but as it matures, it will lead to intercity travel, and it'll be wonderful for people because it's going to be safe. It'll still work in a mixed mode environment.
Okay, Mr. Snyder, why are you not dealing yourself out of business?
Well, this is a great question, and this is sort of at the heart of the matter. So what's great about this is that we as an industry are beginning to speak in terms that are typically more associated with the technology and the high-tech sectors. And that is in the form of use cases. So mixed mode, multiple use cases, whether you're trying to get from point to point in a city or from city to city, interurban, suburban, there are so many different use cases for personal transportation that to think that a $10 trillion global industry is going to be solved by a single solution is really not, probably realistic from our view. The way we look at this, and the reason, in pretty much every other category that we consume, food, music, media, lodging, consumer models either are changing or have changed. We buy things differently. We buy what we want, we pay for what we use, we do it on our phone. And from our perspective, that concept of a consumer model where you're consuming this category of personal transportation is an entirely unexplored area, one that really marks the transformation of our industry. So whether you use public transportation, which we believe will still be an available option to go from place to place, whether you use a private conveyance, which is automated, or in some other way, even highly automated, is an option. The point is that getting from place to place will become a more efficient and lower cost per passenger mile opportunity for people. We think that if you reduce that demand for mobility, people view mobility and moving around as a basic need today, not a luxury or something like that. And that's exciting, because if you really believe that, and you're looking at the people who can create the assets that move from place to place, well, fundamentally that's what we do. And so if the way we offer those up to the consumer public is different, just a different consumer model, well then that's our obligation to figure out how to serve them what they need.
Gentlemen, clearly we need automated microphones. Mr. Kinley Clay, you said the AV Start Act and the Self-Drive Act are the right approaches. Mr. Snyder, you said there's an urgency to passing the AV Start Act. So let me ask you, Mr. Mansuetti, have you looked at this legislation and do you advocate the passage of it?
We support it We appreciate the work that's been done, and it provides a clear and certain framework moving forward. So we very much support and look forward to the passage.
And Doctor, we've taken a vote up here, and we can't seem to get up a majority for how to pronounce your name. So would you help us?
Yes, sir. It's AVID, just like what air comes out of.
Just like the dairy in Oxford, Mississippi. Okay. Well, what do you think about this legislation? Is there an urgency to getting this done? And if we get it done, how soon will we see the fruits of it?
I actually haven't read it in its entirety.
Okay.
So I'll pass on that.
Well, okay, and that's fair enough. Let me ask you then, who wants to talk about hot cars? 3 of you have advocated the passage of this legislation. The AV bill contains the hot car provision, which I helped co-sponsor. There were approximately 755 child vehicular heat stroke fatalities in the United States between 1990 and 2015. We've heard concerns about the costs of this, but also we've heard that with the development of sensors to detect the presence of other vehicles, we might as well go ahead and spend the extra $30 to $50 to do the heat sensors. So let me start with you, Mr. Snyder, because you already have the Audi MMI Connect app for smartphones with this level of precise sensing and mobile connectivity. Can that be a way to jumpstart the provision and save the lives of children in the back seats? And then other people might want to comment on this.
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity to respond to that. The ability to save lives in vehicles, regardless of how those lives are lost, is a priority for Audi. So the ability to use smartphone technology or wireless or anything really to improve the safety of vehicles is in our best interest. So, this is yet one other example, I think, of how we've shown a commitment to safety and how we believe that the passage of this bill and the ability to greater connect cars, both to terrestrial and in other locations, is important. So,
how close is Audi to this capability?
I can't speak to that directly, but I can definitely give you a response after the hearing.
Anyone else want to comment? Mr. Kinley Clay?
Senator Wicker, thank you for your question. I think it's important to understand that there's two directions this technology will develop. The first is automobiles that sold to customers, they own them and have increasingly automated functions. And I can't speak to hot cars in that category. The category that Zoox is developing is we don't sell the car, we own and operate the vehicle in a city and customers pay per minute, per mile. In that case, our vehicle is designed to be deployed for up to 16 hours. We expect a utilization rate of 50 to 60%, and so we would condition the cabin throughout its deployment environment. It's never parked for a long period of time in a car park and getting hot, and so the ability for that issue to be eradicated with our architecture is, I would say, complete.
Mr. Mansway?
As we develop sensors for interior occupancy sensing and also driver monitoring, these technologies can also be used to do just that, so to detect occupants in the car and also sense the temperature and provide a warning. So those are things we're looking at actively as we develop this technology.
Seems like we ought to be able to do it without much cost. We've heard questions about infrastructure in New York. And we've heard questions about cross-country trips. We hope Congress is about to get a recommendation from the administration about an infrastructure bill. What do we need to include in infrastructure legislation that could facilitate the development of autonomous vehicles?
Well, that's another great question, and one where I think we have to take this initiative in the right perspective. So while many would like to think that tomorrow we're going to see autonomous vehicles connected and taking us where we want to go, the reality is that this will be a longer term, more of an evolution than a revolution. And so specifically, what do we need in an infrastructure bill today is not something I don't think anybody can comment on specifically. But what we do need is the ability to put more vehicles on the road, to test them, to understand where the pinch points are, where the safety compromises might be, and to be able to very accurately and clearly communicate that to an administration, and a legislature that has the ability to enact and improve those conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank Chairman Thune and Ranking Member Nelson for hosting this meeting. I will say this is the best attended committee meeting I've been to since I've been a member of this committee. So maybe we need to have more meetings here at the Auto Show, Mr. Chairman, or just have more hearings about an incredibly exciting topic. And it's really a pleasure to be here with the industry. And Senator Thune, thank you so much for your leadership on this bill. I think we all saw his passion in his opening comments, and the fact that I enjoy working, the fact that he asked the 3 big questions right out of the box, like no nonsense. Let's get right to the core of this, and that's what you've done all along. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Nelson, thank you for being there every step of the way as well, and working with all of us to make this a reality. And I agree, this technology is transformative. You call it disruptive or creative. It is all of those things. In fact, I believe it is the biggest thing to happen to the auto industry since the first car came off of the assembly line. And we all know that was a pretty big deal for the auto industry to have an assembly line. And this will be equally as big, and it's happening faster than I think the public realizes. Given the fact that General Motors, as Senator Nelson mentioned, has already announced by 2019 to have cars. Ford Motor Company is going to have a self-driving car off of their assembly line. They've announced by 2021. Other companies are making similar claims. I was just at the Detroit Auto Show earlier, or last week, which is an incredible show, and they were featuring a number of self-driving cars, including the Ford Motor self-driving car that they're working on and testing in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that delivers pizzas, Domino's pizzas to your door, which is innovative, and just one example of all the things that are going to happen as a result of this. But in order for that to happen, and this topic has already been brought up about consumer trust, and we're certainly aware of that. We've got to win trust, because this is a new thing for consumers that they've got to feel comfortable. So the legislation before us, the AV Start Act, actually creates a requirement that the Department of Transportation work with both industry and other government agencies to advance responsible consumer education. And central to that, in my mind, is to make sure consumers understand what these cars can and cannot do, particularly till before we get to level 4 or 5. There's always an issue related to the car may not do everything you think it is, and you will expect it can, and then something bad will happen as a result of that. And if those kinds of accidents occur, we can expect to have significant consumer pushback on this technology for not doing it right or not doing it in a way that fully informs consumers. So my question to you, this is required in the legislation, is that how will your companies, or some ideas, how will we accomplish that to make sure that before anybody gets in that car, they understand what this car can or cannot do? Given that requirement in this bill, how will you react to it? And anyone can start.
I may differ a little bit from some of the other panelists, that I think that open city testing alone is not the right option. It's only one piece of a very thorough and integrated approach to testing. The problem with open city testing is that your events aren't controllable. They're real world, which is a great thing, and something that needs to be done, but you can't control the events, and it's hard sometimes to observe them, and it's certainly hard to repeat them. So I think you need a holistic approach, an integrated approach to testing to build the trust that includes everything from simulation and emulation, where you can really control and run lots of test cases, to closed track testing, where you can focus on those edge cases. For instance, like Senator Nelson said today, when someone makes a U-turn out in the middle of the road, that's not a Six Sigma event that happens once in a million times, unfortunately, but there will be lots of those cases. For instance, the Tesla that was in the automobile accident where a white truck pulled out in front of it, and the sun was just in the perfect location that it couldn't see it, the sensor couldn't see it, and it ran into it. There'll be a vehicle that's going in a road in Kentucky that's got potholes in it and no lanes on it, and a horse will run out in front of it. Those are the rare events that you're not going to be able to get in city exclusively. So you have to build an infrastructure that allows you to test all those cases and really characterize when it works, when it doesn't work, and for those cases where it doesn't work, what can we do to improve that? And I think that's going to take a little bit of time to do that.
Anyone else?
I would say, thank you, Senator Peters. I would say, as I mentioned before, this awareness and education of the consumer, we have a duty as an industry to do this, and I would liken it as to when we introduced electronic stability control. We were early innovators in ABS. This is a foundational element of automated driving, and we really understood, together with the insurance industry and other industries, to educate the public of how to use this particular safety system and what is happening when it's in use. So I think we have to continue to demonstrate through good use cases. I mentioned before, example of parking, that people can become familiar in a safe environment and begin to trust the overall technology. And I think that's happening as we introduce some of these safety features in the vehicles today, like automatic emergency braking, or lane departure warning, or adaptive cruise control. So I think people will become more familiar, and as more technology is available on the road, it will continue to build that consumer trust.
Okay, if I may just ask a quick question, because you brought up the point of having not just city testing, but testing in other environments, including proving grounds. Of course, you are one of the automated vehicle proving grounds that has been designated. We have one in Michigan. I see Mr. Maddox here from the American Center for Mobility. How are these proving grounds operating? How do you feel where we are with them, how important they are, and what can we do in Congress to make your work and the other 9 proving grounds work more efficiently?
I think they're emergent and they're evolving over time as the technology evolves, and they're being responsive to how the technology is going. I think they're a critical part. Like I said, one of the big advantages of these test grounds is that you could control the events and you could experiment with it. So you could take those fringe test cases that technology really is not quite mature for, and you could experiment around them and really understand when and where this technology works. As you mentioned, there are 10 sites across the nation that have been chosen as testing grounds, and all of them are going to have a little bit different expertise. But I don't think there's a winner-take-all approach to it. I think you need multiple people doing different things and integrating it all together. I think that these test grounds can provide a valuable interface to the government to help with regulations, because it can provide data and a science-based approach to what truly regulations need to be and what ones don't need to be. I think many of them are attached to universities, which I think is a great thing, because universities are independent, they're unbiased. They don't have anything in this market, and they can provide real true advice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Next up, we're trying to get this cleared through the Senate. Next up is Senator Elder.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for this work. I want to thank a tremendous amount of interest in this technology. And I'm kind of proud that Nevada's been one of the leaders in driverless technology. We were the very first state to pass autonomous vehicle legislation in 2011 that paved the way for testing. And last year, Nevada also passed a full implementation of autonomous vehicles for personal and commercial use. And we now have autonomous trucks and buses that are testing on our roads. So in Nevada, we have nearly 500,000 seniors. We have about 275,000 disabled individuals. We also have 300,000 veterans. I think my father and my father fall in all 3 of those categories. But needless to say, that these individuals, this technology will bring them, I think, greater independence and greater mobility. Having said all that, my experience in this is, without telling you my age, everybody younger than me loves this technology. Everybody that's older, they're a little worried about this technology, and so we got a lot to do. But I do believe that there's a real opportunity. I know that most people on this program probably at one time or another had an opportunity to be in an autonomous vehicle. I did. In fact, 20 years ago, I was at CES, and they had the latest and greatest piece of equipment, and that was a hydrogen vehicle that could go about 60 miles on a tank of gas at 30 miles an hour, and cost $1 million. Here we are 20 years later, Tesla has Model 3, and it's $35,000, it'll go 500 miles, and it'll go 80 miles an hour. So it's amazing how much things have changed in the last 20 years. In fact, last year at CES, I was in an Audi with Delphi technology and was able to drive 7 miles on the freeway, get off the freeway in an autonomous vehicle. There was somebody in the driver's seat, but their hands were off the wheel and were off the wheel and the gas pedal. It's just fascinating to see just what happened in the last 20 years. Mr. Kent Clay, you talked a little bit about the future, and I know Senator Nelson talked about 20 years from now. It sounds like to me, the equipment and the technology that you're offering, sounds like 20 years from now, no one will own a vehicle.
Senator Heller, thank you for your question. I think it was in 1908 that the Model T Ford shipped. How long did it take before the coach builders were out of business? If you look back historically, it was around 2 decades. I think with the safety case of this technology and how quickly we can advance it, well within 2 decades, I think everyone will be driving automated vehicles or using shared automated mobility, because that's what we need to do to make the roads safe.
Talking rural vehicles, or rural areas, I'm part of that 1% of those farmers you were mentioning. You know, we had 303 vehicular deaths last year in Nevada. More than half of them were done in the rural portions, happened in the rural portions of the state. What kind of testing is being done out in the rural portions? And even though it's less than 20% of the population of rural America, it still has a above average vehicular death rate. What are we going to do for the, you know, Mr. Avey, Dr. Avey, you talked about animals and how are we going to assure that in the rural portions where these accidents do occur, that they're being tested?
Yeah, I'm reminded of the Arthur C. Clarke quote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. This is a really new technology. To people in rural areas or in cities, it might look like magic, but to developers, this is advanced technology. And we understand what we're building and how it works. And in fact, the way our vehicles are engineered, we don't have to understand that it's a horse or a squirrel or a person to know that there's something there and we need to stop. And so we can engineer the vehicles that understand abstractly what's happening geometrically in the environment to get the requisite safety we need. And what we really need to do is take the public, everyone in America, on the journey of how this technology works so that they can understand it to get the assurance that they need that it's safe.
Let me ask you one more question real quickly before I run out of time, and that is, why was it advantageous for you to go from Australia to the United States to do your work here as opposed to your own country?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, I think the intersection of creativity, capital, and computer science in America is unprecedented. And to create the technology that we do, we need the engineering depth of talent that's in this country that we can access to scale. We need investors that are brave enough to invest in such an advanced technology. And we need the connections that are in this country, because it's integrated, to bring the right set of peoples together, even working with you today, to make this technology a reality.
Thank you, Senator Heller. Next up is Senator Hassan.
Member Nelson, thank you to all the witnesses for being here and for the work you're doing. This is indeed very exciting technology and really represents the potential for enormous innovation in all aspects of American life and global life, actually. So thank you for the work you're doing. I wanted to drill down on a couple of things. I happen to be the mom of a 29-year-old young man with very severe disabilities. So much of what you talk about is very exciting for those of us who live in a world in which we have a family member with a disability. But it's also a reminder that people who don't have disabilities often think they know what solutions are for people who experience disabilities, and they forget to talk to people who actually experience disabilities. Example being, yes, Mrs. Hassan, the entryway is accessible for your son in a wheelchair, to find that there's a little tiny lift without the adequate turning radius to get a particular kind of wheelchair in and out, right? So can you all just talk to me about what interactions you're having with people who might represent the disability community to really understand and drill down on what the different populations within that community will need?
This is an immensely important topic, and it's one that I came to understand in a much more profound way of someone with a disability and the challenges associated with getting into and out of a vehicle to do some very simple things. In the reality is that automated vehicles hold the potential for greater self-sufficiency and the ability to provide a basic level of mobility for persons with disabilities that doesn't exist there today. And the way we think about that is really the way we think about engineering almost any system, right? Which is to understand that customer's journey, to try to think through the very specific moments that matter and the points of considerable duress that are undergone, and to really factor those into our engineering models, right? To understand what are the differences for somebody, because disabilities aren't all the same, right? There's a wide variety of them, and our work with with ADA compliance and other pieces of regulation, I think, has given us as an industry a very deep respect for the need to provide mobility and transportation for all. And that, this is yet another case where it's a very exciting moment in time.
Thank you. Anybody else, just briefly, because I do have a couple other questions. The second question, shifting to some of the concerns I hear from consumers and constituents, is because of the technological innovations that drive AV, you all will have an awful lot of consumer data available to you. So the question is, what information will be collected on consumers who purchase AVs? What's the industry doing to protect the data from being sold and shared without the consumer's consent? And how easily can consumers access and change what data is collected and shared about? Anybody?
Maybe I'll start to consumer data and security and privacy is very important. So we believe that first and foremost we need to protect this data. And we also need to have consent to use the data. As to the extent of what data will be collected and how it will be shared and how it will be used, I think that continues to develop as these business models develop. But for us, in developing the technology, it's first and foremost how we protect this data and data security.
Else? All right, last question, which we probably can't handle in 48 seconds, and I'll submit it in writing, but I'm a former governor, and I am sitting here listening to all of the things that state and local governments are going to need to be thinking about to accommodate and help launch this technology. What do we build, right? Where do we build them? How do we deal with the reality that there are bad actors out there who would like to try to infiltrate the systems, software systems that run this technology? This becomes critical infrastructure. How are we going to partner and deal with that? How are we going to deal with job training for the next generation and for the people who are today going to be displaced by this technology? And lastly, there is always that question in rural America, which is how do we get out this new technology and infrastructure, that last mile, where population, or in my case, in New Hampshire, the last 2/3 of my state, it isn't the last, it's the first to everybody who lives in my north country, but 2/3 of my state is populated by 52,000 people. And so how are we going to leverage what we need to leverage and get this technology out to the least densely populated places in our country so that everybody has the freedom and the economic advantage that this technology brings? So we'll submit that in writing, and I look forward to working with you guys on that.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. We'll make sure we get that responded to. Senator in office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, every time you ask for a yes or no answer, you don't get a yes yes for no answer. So I'm going to test you guys. I've got two questions I'm going to ask, and listen very carefully. First of all, I want to say, Mr. Clay, you're the only one in your opening statement that used a couple of phrases that I like to use, one being level playing field, and the other government without picking winners. So here's the first question. Since we're at an auto show, I want to highlight an issue that is a concern to me and perhaps to others who are here today, which we don't talk much about. The fact that federal policy is stacked against liquid fuels. This year, auto show is debuting the most electric vehicles ever. But electric vehicles don't even make up 1% of the nation's auto sales, and auto manufacturers are producing more and more of them. Of course, why? As Merrill Matthews, a scholar at the Institute for Policy Innovation, puts it, car makers are building cars and trucks the government wants their consumers to have, and that means electrical vehicles. In 1975, Congress created a law to help with the fuel shortage situation by establishing the corporate average fuel economy, or CAFE standards. We no longer have a fuel shortage issue, but that didn't stop the Obama administration in California from ensuring standards increasing beyond their electric car fantasies on the rest of us. But consumers want trucks and SUVs. They make up 2/3 of the vehicles sold. Yet these vehicles don't help automakers meet current DOT and EPA regulations, so they make more and more electrics to lower the overall mileage at a significant loss. Additionally, taxpayers are on the hook for up to $7,500 per electric or hybrid vehicle sold today in the form of tax credits. When Hong Kong ended their tax credit, the sales dropped significantly, which goes to show you that people want to make their own decisions. So as electric vehicles are forced onto the U.S. consumer, the liquid fuel industries, and I'm talking about oil and gas and ethanol, will be wondering why their government abandoned them in pursuit of the California dream. The federal government should not be in the business of dictating to consumers what type of cars they should have, or creating winners and losers. So this is question number one. Do you believe the federal government should be in the business of dictating to consumers what types of cars they should have and creating winners and losers? Let's start with you, Mr. Clay. Yes or no?
No.
Very good. How about you, Doctor?
So the question of the government picking winners and losers, that was your main question? Yep, no.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the issue of level playing fields and the government picking winners and losers, we believe the consumer should have the choice.
Good for you. I think that's very good. All of you. I'm proud of you. Now, the last question is the promise of automatic vehicles technology will impact all of the users of our nation's highways and transportation system. You highlight and this would be to you again, starting Mr. Clay, you highlight in your testimony the strong safety benefits that come with more autonomous vehicles on the road. Do you believe that these benefits can be or should be realized by all motor vehicles, including trucks, which are driving on the roads today? Yes or no?
Thank you for the question. I believe this technology will expand to all modes of technology.
Yes or no?
And transportation.
That's yes. Okay, great. The rest of you, please.
I don't think that it has to be no, but I think it certainly could be an advantage.
Okay, your answer, Mr. Mansfield?
Yes, this can be helpful.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Aben, why do you think there should be what is the reason for you? In what exception, what justifies the exceptions of not having this apply to trucks in your mind?
I don't think there's an exception. I think that, again, it can be market motivated, but I think that technology certainly can help that industry tremendously.
That's good. Good answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Senator up next.
Thanks very much to each of you for being here and for answering our questions. We're on the precipice of a groundbreaking technological revolution, one that combines computing power with telecommunications abilities, sensing abilities, so as to really change the way the American people interact with their means of transportation, and that has the power simultaneously to make us healthier, to make us safer. One of the things that I worry about in this circumstance is that the only thing that can stop this technological revolution from taking place and from improving the lives of 330 Americans is the government itself. I worry, for example, about the push that some are seeming to desire to depart from our traditional regulatory processes and to add an additional layer here, specifically for you, specifically for this technology. I shudder at the thought of what the government might have done had pre-market approval been a prerequisite for starting some of the technologies that brought the internet to life for the American people, or if pre-market approval had stifled any of the number of innovations that make the lives of the American people better from day to day. So, Mr. Kentley Clay, I'd like to start with you and ask you a question regarding how regulations like NHTSA pre-market approval might stifle innovation in this industry from your perspective.
Senator, thank you for your question. I don't know that NHTSA actually has a regulation out for pre-market approval, but our view is that with the new technology, you definitely don't want to stifle it. At the same time, we need to deploy it in a safe and risk-managed way. And the right way to do that is exactly what we're doing here today, having informed conversation so that all stakeholders understand the politics of what's being created and making the right judgment calls about how to bring it into.
And it's not in your interest, it's not part of your, it's not your desire to make an unsafe vehicle, correct?
Absolutely not. I mean, I would say that today in the state of Michigan and Florida, and I think Arizona as well, you legally could drive a vehicle with no one sitting behind the wheel, but no developer is doing that because they are making the judgment themselves that the technology is not ready.
Right. And if you did make that judgment call and you went for it, people would not drive that vehicle. People wouldn't purchase that vehicle. People wouldn't buy stock in the company. People wouldn't invest in that company.
It would be incredibly counterproductive to spend years and billions of dollars developing the technology to release it prematurely and have people lose confidence in the technology.
And by the same token, you're not asking for a regulation-free environment. You're not asking for the government to stay out of this entirely and to pretend as if this were the Wild West in which there are no rules.
Absolutely not. We're asking for an informed conversation to, in a risk-managed way, deploy the technology in a way that expedites its benefits.
Aren't there, in fact, some safety-related risks that could result in the wake of it, and precisely because of an overly aggressive federal government regulatory regime?
That's a potential outcome, yes.
In other words, isn't there a very real risk with an emerging technology like this one? The government sets a standard, and that standard could become at once the floor and the ceiling, thus stifling innovation.
So I think standards should be set based on data, and we don't quite have the data yet. So if we set standards before we fully understand what we're creating, we could stifle innovation.
Just about 2 weeks ago, Secretary Elaine Chao, the head of the U.S. Department of Transportation, made an announcement that the Department of Transportation will be seeking public input across the transportation industry to, quote, identify barriers to innovation and shape initiatives. I'd like to ask each of you in the moment we've got remaining, just a few seconds, tell me what you think the biggest barriers to innovation are. We'll start with you, Dr. Aikman.
I do think the application of all regulatory policies in this industry, because it's completely different and it's a new frontier, we have to be careful of taking existing policies and regulating them based on those.
Mr. Kentley.
I would commend Senator Thrun and Senator Nelson on the opening remarks. I think you guys get it. As a new entrant into this new era of mobility, the biggest barrier to innovation would be an incumbent trying to make it difficult for us to deploy the technology when we're actually know what we're doing.
To drive out would-be competitors.
That's right.
Mr. Mansberg.
must be careful not to over-regulate here, and that's why we're in such strong support of the AV Start bill. I think you guys are doing exactly the right thing that allows us to continue to innovate iteratively on these technologies and bring them to market as safely and quickly as we can.
Well said. I do agree, Mr. Schneider.
I think you said it in your opening comments. There's a confluence of technological changes happening, and to properly regulate this so that that doesn't prohibit innovation while maintaining the safety that we all require.
Thank you very much. I see my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the ranking member, and thank all of you. It's been a very interesting hearing. I want to touch on a subject that I think Mr. Mantuetti mentioned in his opening statement, and that's the workforce issues here. I would imagine at this point, with innovation that's going forward, it's pretty highly technically advanced degrees, engineering, computer science types of innovationists that have gotten us to this point. But for the workforce of tomorrow to meet the challenges of the AV technology, you mentioned apprenticeships, you mentioned grants for STEM, and then professional development for teachers. I'm wondering how you think this will impact the jobs of the future, because we've heard a little bit about how it's going to impact the jobs of the future in a negative way, in the development and in the training. And I'd also like to just remind everybody that in the STEM fields, women and minorities are very underrepresented. And it's important that we spur that next generation into what I think is going to be a very exciting field. So, Mr. Mantuetti.
I think first, when you look at the current state that we're in, when we're developing the technology is very exciting, and we're being able to attract a lot more of these STEM candidates into things like autonomous driving. If you look at the automotive industry, that has been kind of stigmatized as, do I want to go into the automotive industry, which was once seen as perhaps dying. So now we're seeing a lot of excitement generated and being able to attract those candidates to work on the exciting new technology. I think in the future, as we discuss, the jobs will be changing in the mobility. So when we look at just a simple case with the automotive, with the auto itself, whether it's a car that we have today, an electrified vehicle, or maybe even a shared taxi, with the increased utilization, there's going to be more different types of maintenance functions, for example. So, I mean, we'll see new opportunities opening up along all these different lines of how the technology is deployed, and then in these use cases as we go to a shared mobility. So I think the importance is to continue to train the workforce, educate them in these new opportunities, and be ready for what with the new jobs of the future.
Right. Dr. Avent, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think that exactly the same thing is certainly the technology relevant to this is going to be around new fields, around machine intelligence, around artificial intelligence, which is computer science based. Certainly there's going to be a lot of sensor development related to this that are going to have to take place. And so technologies around STEM, and particularly what we call core STEM, which is the engineering, the mathematical, physical sciences, are going to be very relevant to
the opportunities are going to be all down, up and down the scale here. It's not just going to be at the high end, probably where it is now on the development portion.
Of the development portion, but also they're going to have to be maintained, they're going to have to be improved, and so really all up and down the scales.
Okay. My second question involves partnership. We talked about some partnerships, but I'm curious to know, it's going to change the face of the highway in terms of road signs and indicators so that the car can pick up indicators rather than the human eye picking up indicators. I'm wondering what kind of partnerships you have with road builders and state DOTs and local transportation authorities. I don't know, anybody would like to, Mr. Kentley-Clay, did you? Dr. Avent, did you have a response to that?
In the case of Florida Polytechnic University, we have a partnership with the Florida Turnpike Enterprise, which is a part of the Florida Department of Transportation, and we're working hand in hand with them on exactly those types of things and experimenting on a closed-loop test track too.
So, Mr. Kentley, you're already doing this, so what kind of coordination do you have with your local transportation authorities, sign makers, all those things?
Yeah, thank you for your question. And this overlaps a little bit with the previous question about infrastructure and spending and should that be deployed in the area of autonomous vehicles. Our view is that we're developing the technology to work with with infrastructure as it is. We don't require new signs, new lane markings, or anything like that for the technology to be introduced into the market at scale. We think if we had that dependency, it would cripple our ability to bring technology into the marketplace. There's various talk of technologies where traffic lights can talk to vehicles, or vehicles can talk to other vehicles or pedestrians. They're interesting in theory, but the problem with those technologies is if you're actually dependent on them, if there's a fault, then the system will fault. And so we're developing our systems in a way that they're robust without dependencies on any sort of infrastructure changes.
Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you very much. Mr. Mansuetti, did you have an additional comment?
With regards to partnerships, we're doing a lot with cities around the country, especially in this area of smart city development. So we're involved a lot in their Department of Transportation and what they're doing on the mobility front in cities. So that's been very interesting.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Young.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Gosh, this has been a very interesting hearing, and there are a lot of reasons for optimism and outright excitement moving forward as these technologies develop. I think the thing perhaps I'm most excited about are the potential changes to the quality of life of a disabled person, of an elderly person, of someone who happens to be sight impaired, and it's going to give them a new sense of independence to be more mobile, improve their quality of life. You can see them integrating into the workforce more. Mr. Kentley Clay, you talk about this in your testimony, how there have been previous mobility ages, I think as you refer to them, and how AI is going to bring on a new mobility age. Could you unpack this concept of the new mobility age a bit for us, please, and just try and paint a picture of how the lives of our disabled and elderly Americans might change as this technology evolves?
Certainly, Senator, thank you for your question. I mean, the pace of change is accelerating. The previous mobility age was, of course, the horse and carriage. It was actually around 4000 BC that we domesticated the horse and put the axle on the wheel, and that gave us co-mobility, and that was a huge change for society in that day to move goods at a much more expeditious rate. That was 6,000 years ago. It looks like we're about to leave the automobile age, which has been in for around 130 years, so it's a much more compressed time span, and go into the age of fully automated transportation, which is coming. There's no unobtainium that needs to be created to create this technology. We understand what we need to do, and it's now just a lot of elbow grease to make it ready for commercial operation. So the change is happening, and we're excited, as many people have commented, that this technology will increase access. You know, our mission statement is connecting people and places, and that's people without qualification, and that's what we want to enhance.
Does anyone have anything to add? Dr. Aker.
Thank you. I think if you look at a lot of industries, they start off as a craftsman model, and then over time they become more to becoming software managed industries. I think in the case of transportation, it still is a craftsman model. You know, we teach a driver how to drive, they get behind the wheel. And this is a natural progression of that industry to move over to a much more software managed industry that we have to teach people how to drive and improve access to a lot of people that generally don't get that.
Mr. Mansetti, let me turn to discussing something others have touched on, the workforce of the future. I know Bosch at least appears to have thought pretty critically about this, from the manufacturing professional development programs to STEM to apprenticeship programs. Continued career and technical education we know will be needed to alleviate any shortfall in the workforce, make sure that that workers have the skill set required to fill the jobs of the future in this space. Could you discuss what role you see moving forward for government, particularly the federal government, but maybe government generally, in making sure that companies like yours will have access to the skilled workforce they need?
Yeah, I think that's going to be very important in the future. You know, as we look today, there is a shortage of skilled workers. So we need to continue to expose and be able to train and qualify the workforce of the future. And I think that comes with it needs a partnership between state and local and federal officials as well as industry. You know, we kind of need to look at a K through, graduate education model and getting those things to work together. Many times we see that there's disconnects when you go through the certain education systems. Southeast working together with states, with the state universities, the technical colleges, the universities, to ensure that the right training is being applied and that we're training people at the right time in the right skills that we need. So we have a very good partnership and we need to continue that.
And as from a policymaker standpoint, I see one of the challenges being trying to work with you to determine what skills are generalized, they're needed across the economy, which skills are specifically needed for this emerging sector, if you will, of the economy, and then which skills are firm specific and ought to be invested in by companies like Bosch, for example. I guess the last thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, I just want to commend those who are responsible for drafting this legislation, for working with all the stakeholders. I understand principled compromises are required to end up where we are today, and I have high confidence this is going to become law, and I'll be supportive. I still do lament, and I want to be on public record lamenting the fact that that we have limited this to passenger vehicles and not incorporated trucks into this legislation. I think we could save a lot of lives and improve a lot of lives if we were to broaden the scope of it. But with that said, I will end on an optimistic note and thank you once again for being here. Thanks for holding this hearing, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Young, and the view you articulated on trucks is one that I share, and I hope that at some point we can have that aspect of this important debate addressed. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin on an optimistic note and thank this excellent panel for giving us a view of the future with this exciting, wondrous technology that will give us a brave new world in automobiles, perhaps beyond automobiles and transit in general. And I want to avoid appearing to be an automotive Neanderthal, Luddite, but simply express a couple of reservations about potential irrational exuberance when safety is at stake. I want to avoid creating another generation of cars that may be unsafe at any speed. And we know from our experience that the simplest of devices in automobiles right now, ignition switches that malfunction, or safety bags that are killers, as a number of my colleagues know, can potentially pose great dangers. Right now, collision avoidance technologies, such as automatic emergency braking, have been proven, they're available, they offer substantial safety benefits, and they've been recommended by the federal government, by safety authorities, by consumer advocates, and in fact, Mr. Mansuti, 73% of Audis sold last year had AEB systems. So Audi is doing way better than many of your colleagues because they sell only about 19% according to 2017 model statistics. And I assume you would agree that making collision avoidance system standard should be a top priority for 2019.
Yes, from a Bosch perspective, we certainly agree, but to speak to Audi, if you might want to, I don't want to talk for you, so I'm sorry, Mr. Schneider.
Absolutely. Look, our record on implementing safety-related automotive devices like automatic emergency braking, I think is pretty well documented, and we do support the further infusion of that technology into our fleet.
So that something as simple as AEB technology, and I know Mr. Mansuti, you produce it, so you would agree, can help save lives. GM has said it's going to be manufacturing autonomous vehicles without steering wheels or pedals by 2019. But Nissan's R&D chief has said, quote, "We will always need a human in the loop." At CES earlier this month, as you know, Mr. Kenley Clay, Phantom Auto demonstrated how a car in Los Angeles can be remotely controlled by a human operator in Mountain View, California. I understand that your company has a patent on this kind of teleoperation technology. So my question to you is, what kind of fallback system would you envision perhaps making use of this technology or a similar technology in the vehicles that will be under your control?
Thank you, Senator. That's a great question. I think the headline is technology fully realized is going to be incredibly safe. To the point that we're going to look back to the age of the automobile and say, wow, we were super reckless allowing that carnage on our roads. And I think you're going to have society having that judgment call within 5 to 10 years. How do we achieve that endpoint? Not to get too deep into the technicals, but our vehicles are engineered with 3 computers. There's a main IO computer, there's a backup computer behind that, and a backup computer behind that, and different power buses. And so if there is a hardware fault or a software fault, our vehicle has special hardware that's designed to stop itself in its lane. It won't go out of its lane and go into what we call a minimal risk condition. This is taking techniques used in aerospace. They're proved to be very safe. In fact, I don't think there's been a fatality in aviation in America in the past 8 years. And these airplanes all flown by triplex fly-by-wire compute systems. And so again, I think it's partly a public education campaign, but we're very confident that we can engineer these vehicles to be robust and safe.
So you would view teleoperation as having a role in the future of your vehicle?
Yeah, I think, when your model is to have autonomous vehicles deployed as a for-hire service in cities, you are still going to need a command center in that city that has human-in-the-loop oversight of the fleet, both to deal with vehicles if they have an issue, but also to deal with customers if they need help as well. And that's part of our model.
Thank you. My time has expired. I have more questions, but maybe we'll have a second round.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Yeah, if you want to ask another question, go ahead. We've got a little bit of time if you guys don't mind. And if anybody else has any final questions, I'm able to.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
This is Rep.
Mr. Aben, on this issue of teleoperation, what role do you think that teleoperation should have in anticipating or dealing with unexpected or unpredictable events? In your testimony, you talk about the importance of testing autonomous vehicles against the rare, unpredictable Six Sigma events, making sure that they're safe for humans. Do you envision teleoperation as having a role?
By teleoperation, you mean remote control, where you have a user somewhere else, not in the vehicle. I think that's maybe a wrong path to go. It could be an interval, but I think that it's more appropriate to go from having the vehicle driver in the vehicle over to fully autonomous. I think military certainly has experimented and done a lot in teleoperation with UAVs and drones and all, and they work and they are safe. But I think that it doesn't meet the full benefit of going to autonomous vehicles.
And let me ask all of you, having taken GM's statement that we will have AVs on the roads by 2019, how soon, in your view, will we have level 5 safe autonomous vehicles? Maybe we can just go down the line and get a prediction in terms of years from now.
I think there's a common thing that says technology is overrated in the near term and underrated in the long term. I think that it's going to be longer than probably many technologists believe. I think a big part of that is going to be the adoption of it and the trust, more so than the technology itself. But I'd say 10 years if I was a betting person.
10 years. Mr. Kennedy Clay?
I think there's a shallow ramp in this technology into early adoption and mass adoption. I think around 2020 you will see fully automated vehicles that are on demand, working in confined geofenced areas in certain locations. And as the technology is improved, that's going to expand.
So that's a more confined area.
That's right.
In 3 years, and then maybe consistent with
3 years.
Yeah. Ms. Mansur?
At Bosch, we agree with that, with Mr. Clay. So we see by the end of the decade, 2020, we'll see these use cases emerge in limited areas. In the next decade, increasingly more rollout of the technology, and by the end of the next decade, I think you'll start to see fully autonomous level 5 vehicles in all cases.
I think in general that we would agree with that time frame. But again, just to reiterate, this is going to be an evolution, and the benefits and the full benefits of autonomous vehicles, really come from not just a single use case or even a handful of use cases. It comes from a preponderance of those use cases. So, over the next decade, we're going to see these enter the fold one by one. But certainly, in the near term, we will have some pretty serious progress.
I just want to close with a final question, recognizing the reservations that have been expressed about the over-involvement of government and pre-market approval, as one of my colleagues said. Nobody is for over-regulation or over-involvement by government, but sometimes standards are necessary, and enforcement of those standards are critically important to saving lives. And Mr. Kennedy Clay, you say in your testimony, I think you'd all agree that standards should be data-based. They should be driven by real facts from the real world. So my question, I think, finally to the panel is, how do we make sure that the government is receiving the kind of data it needs to make smart decisions about how to protect consumers? Anybody who wants to volunteer is welcome.
I mean, we see the technology with automated vehicles, no one can do it alone. So it takes a coalition, a collaboration, and a partnership, and that includes the government. So we will continue to collaborate openly, and where you need information, we're very helpful to provide that, so that we make good, sound decisions, we don't over-regulate, and we provide this framework that allows us to move forward in the future, to bring this technology to life, which everyone wants, as quickly and as safely as possible.
I agree with that. There's not going to be one industry or one type of person that's going to solve this problem. It's going to take a collection of lots of people. So I think consortiums, everyone working together and developing the technologies and testing them, very important.
And you would all agree, I assume, that government does have a role to play in protecting safety. And in fact, in developing this technology, the reference was made earlier to the internet. In fact, the internet was the result of a partnership, a continuing partnership over many decades of private industry, academia, and the government, principally the military, heavily and powerfully by a book called The Innovators, written by Walter Isaacson. Anybody who has any question about that partnership should read the book, and I think it provides a useful template, perhaps, for this new technology. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. And we have in our bill safety reporting requirements that address a lot of those concerns that you voiced today. And I'm hoping the panel has been influential in getting you to vote for the bill eventually. So, I think Senator Peters has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you're right, we've thought long and hard about making sure that safety is first and foremost in this legislation, making sure that we're trying to find that middle ground to allow innovation to flourish, but also being careful about making sure these vehicles meet standards before they get out onto the road. The proving grounds that you talked about as well, which we need to have more government involvement as well to make sure you have the resources to fully test these vehicles. And we'll collect this data as time goes on, and there'll be a lot of data collected, and it'll get better and better. But the question for me is that we have to get to the point, Mr. Kevin Clay, where you said that we deal with roughly 40,000 deaths on the highway, the hundreds of thousands of debilitating injuries. We're on the verge of making major progress to eliminate nearly all of those when you take out the human factor of the human error factor. So that's a major motivator for me, and I think most of the folks have done. You can comment on that as you like. You're pushing the button before you do that, though. The question that came up a little bit dealt with the power plant. We've talked about a lot of factors related to this technology. But one thing that I have heard, I wanted the panel to comment on, does this mean we are moving to electric power plant? My understanding is that this technology works best with an electric power plant as opposed to internal combustion engine. Are we seeing a change in that as well? Mr. Schneider, maybe first, given the work that you're doing with your company and any others that would jump in. And if that's the case, we've had a number of questions related to infrastructure, et cetera. That will lead to a lot of other issues as to how do we make sure we have the infrastructure to support those electric vehicles that are on the road. Sir?
Certainly, that's an outstanding question, and one of those things that at Auto we think of as one of three major technological changes that are driving the industry. Right, in addition to mobility in autonomous vehicles, is electrification. So, yes, indeed, power plants are moving to the electric variety, whether those are battery operated or use other technologies to do that is, I think, an industry question in the longer term. However, the infrastructure of the vehicle is moving to an electrical one as a whole. And as a guy who started his career as a powertrain engineer designing engines at Ford, I can tell you that it has moved and accelerated even just over the past decade. So I would expect it to continue.
Yes, for us, we see the future of mobility as automated, connected, and electrified. So electrification will have will play a large role in the future of autonomous vehicles. And to your specific question, yes, some of the things are much more easily realized in an electric vehicle architecture for this new technology.
Getting around cities on roads kind of sucks today. This technology is going to make it awesome. So we should all work together and just make it happen. Zoox is pure electric. On top of the 40,000 fatalities in America alone, in 2016, millions actually going to hospital. There was a study from the MIT that came out that said around 50,000 people in the US died up to a decade early because of pollution from mobility. Right? So as we live in really increasing, the United Nations also forecasts that in 2050, 75% of this world's population are going to live in megacity-like environments. And so to get longevity of life, we really want to have zero-emission mobility in our most dense urban environments.
I'll defer to panelists because they're actually developing a lot of this technology. There was an academic. As an academic, I don't think that the coupling of the technology is neither a necessary nor sufficient condition. I think you could do autonomy on internal combustion engines, but I do think electrification is an incredible opportunity that we should take advantage of.
Senator Peters, thank you. Senator Nelson.
Mr. Chairman, for the record, I'd like to insert a statement of advocates for highway and auto safety as part of our record. And I would like to conclude my remarks and questions by asking Dr. Avent, what is going to be the impact of this new kind of quickly developing technology upon our educational system? And I ask the question since my experience is informed by what happened to the whole educational system as a result of the space program. Going to the moon, the Apollo program, it created a whole generation of engineers, mathematicians, scientists, technologists. What do we see going forward here?
That's a good point, sir. Once I heard that the amount of money that we spent on the entire space program we saved in communications within 6 months. And this was when I was in college, which was a long, long time ago, and I'm sure the statistics are much more compelling now. Certainly this is a big market, as we've talked about. It's going to be a disruptive market. It's going to change and be far-reaching into a lot of industries, but also into a lot of end applications, as I pointed out in my testimony, not just public transportation, but agriculture, and it will be pervasive. And the technology involved in this will be new technology that needs to be developed. Artificial intelligence has been around for many years, but it still needs to evolve a lot and to grow. And so I think that we're going to see a new generation of engineers. I think we will see much more focus on electrical engineering, on computer science, on data analytics, machine learning, those types of technologies. And I think the market will pull from the universities and really create much more people going into those areas.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. I just one last sort of quick question. One is, because lots been talked about today, and as we've looked at this issue, the stakeholder community obviously highlights, emphasizes the fact that this is going to save a lot of lives. And my question very directly is, do you think the safety in terms of lives saved as a result of automated vehicles as advertised by the industry will be realized? I mean, are we the lives saved as a result of this technology consistent with what the reality is?
I can say that I am more than optimistic that we will realize the benefits that we're even just laying out today. I don't think that there's ever been a moment in the history of the industry where we were on the verge of such profound improvement, both in safety, lost productivity, and just the benefits of living in our cities and the quality of our air and everything that goes with it. So from that perspective, I think that I am absolutely optimistic that this is going to happen.
We share that feeling as well. This is a revolutionary technology that will dramatically improve the quality of all of our lives. And with safety, absolutely, we will make tremendous progress with this technology.
But beyond that, these vehicles have amazing 360-degree perception with no blind spots, and they're always watching. Having been developing this technology now for 3 years full time, I and the team are absolutely convinced that it will deliver on its safety promise.
Even when you account for the once in a million events, which were the rare cases, when you divide 40,000 by a million, it's pretty close to zero. So yeah, I do agree. It's going to make it incredible.
One quick follow-up question. I think that I agree with that. I think when you get out there in the future, the predictive, the quality of those predictions in terms of lives saved, I think will be realized. But I think for a lot of people, it's looking at this transitional period. And I'll use as an example Senator Nelson's example this morning of the car that made a U-turn in front of him. And in a perfectly autonomous world, the autonomous vehicles would have detected that and reacted accordingly and prevent an accident. But what happens when you've got a driver in one vehicle, an autonomous vehicle operating next to it? And how does in that transitional period where you've got drivers on the road, autonomous vehicles on the road, what happens in those types of situations? And I'm just curious to what your thoughts are about what the safety features might be, and if a human reacts the wrong way to an autonomous vehicle.
So Senator and anyone on the panel would be welcome to come and visit Zoox in San Francisco and see for yourself exactly how we respond in those situations. Driving in complex downtown environments, we actually face those scenarios every hour. And now's not the time to go into technical reasons about how we solve that, but we have the methods in place to handle those situations.
Good. All right. One more. Senator, one more. Now you really have to vote for the bill.
I expect I will vote for a bill. In the meantime, in the time that we are waiting, whether it's 3 years or 10 years, for the deployment of this technology on a widespread, perhaps universal scale, would everyone here agree that safety mechanisms like collision avoidance technology, automatic braking systems should be fully deployed, and that Audi's example should be followed by the rest of the industry? I will spare you an answer, Mr. Schneider.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
As we're developing a 100% autonomous vehicle, we already have those systems in place in our architecture. Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to, before we close out, I want to ask unanimous consent to place in the record testimony from NXP Semiconductors concerning connected vehicles and cybersecurity, as well as testimony submitted from Honda regarding innovation in the changing automotive industry. So we'll include those without objection. I would say to the members of our panel, if you could, and members of our panel here could get questions in, we'd like to get those responded to, turn around to complete the record in 2 weeks. So if you all could, if there are written questions that come in response to this hearing, do your best to get back to us, the answers back to us as quickly as possible. We greatly appreciate it. And I want to thank the crowd for being here today, and you know, it's good participation from our audience. And how about we give all these folks a hand?